Hey guys, it's Istebrak. Today we're going to be talking about transferring from grayscale to color, which is something that I've always delayed a little bit. Talking about it or talking about it too much or over glamorizing what color does in a canvas or bringing it into my personal work. Color as a whole has been very delayed, and that's for a very, very specific reason. In all kinds of art schools, you find that grayscale is delayed for the first or second year of school because what happens is that color is delayed, sorry, for the first or second years of school because what happens is it gets in the way of you learning all the fundamentals that are in the backdrop of painting a face well or painting anything well. There's edge work, there's light on form, there's the rules of cast shadows and shadows in general, there's having good control over core shadows. It's just a myriad of fundamentals you have to learn in order to successfully paint something and paint something realistically if you're going for the realistic look, which is very popular and is probably the only biggest movement we have. So when it comes to color, the color's success is dependent on your grayscale success, which is why I've delayed color in my work. I have delayed it so much that it has been, I've been starved of color. So when I finally used color for this practice, for this piece, it was just very, very satisfying and it was long overdue. Color is very beautiful, of course, without a doubt. And color is a wonderful way to dress up your painting. Really, because color looks so beautiful, a lot of students are drawn to using it too soon. And it's an illusion. Color success, again, goes hand in hand with the values underneath it. It's not color doing the work. It's the values doing the work because they're still intact. A forehead still behaves like an altitude. A nose still behaves like an altitude. And we end up having this really believable structure and concrete fundamentals intact. So when we bring in the color, it just adds to the beauty. It does not make up for the lack of effect or the lack of form or the lack of light. So that's the key term here, that you can't graduate into color until you paint some really well painted grayscale faces for a while. And this is why the 14-day challenge is in grayscale, to help you expedite how well you use your values, to help you learn faster. Color gets in the way. On top of all the fundamentals, you also have to deal with skin tones and color and translucency and biology, or excessive focus on biology of skin. So this is why I delay it. And when I brought it in this time, it felt wonderful because it was what I wanted to go for. And there are a couple of effects I use color-wise that I wanted to talk about today. That I would invite you guys to try once you're done with your 14-day challenges or you've painted enough faces, you feel like you're ready for some exploratory, stylized color use. These are some of the tricks that I've used for this painting today. So you'll see me do that in a second. I added a lot of light around her eyes. I kind of blinded her eyes a little bit. Just like the blind eyes, and some of that blindness, the value that we use around the blind eyes stretches into the values around the eyelids. So where we would usually have a line of black to outline the eye and give it some life and beauty, we take away from that line and we have just this pale, milky, dewy look that extends even beyond the whites of the eyes into the eyelids. So that was an effect I really wanted to try, and that effect is twofold. Value, so we're stretching out that milky value everywhere, and also apply this as a color. So the color of the eyes that we go for, be it green or blue or yellow or some magical color, we bring some of that color in on a low opacity soft brush and use it on the eyelids. So it's twofold, as you can see. And what happens is that creates this effect. It actually does happen in the way the naked eye looks at stuff. We blend colors together. Our eyes blend colors together that are beside each other. So if something is white surrounded by a lot of black, the white parts of that object look a little bit dimmer than white because we're blending. If we're looking at something blue and it's juxtaposed with something that is very, very white, some of that blue will seep into the whites and we'll see a light blue or a white blue instead of just white and blue. So our eyes blend stuff together. Our eyes play tricks on us. And these tricks, we as artists have to remember them when we're applying color, especially in color. Sometimes something looks green when really it's just grayscale, only because it's surrounded by reds. And that's because when red is lacking red, it's going to look like the complementary tone. So grayscales or desaturated tones surrounded by reds look more green. So if you ever had to make the under eye area look more green, you don't actually have to bring in the green. You just have to make a shift away from red, be it toward an orange or a yellow, which has more than enough green, because it's the closest neighboring value to green, or just grayscale, and it'll behave like a green. So color is where all these funny little tricks happen, and all of those funny little tricks happen because of the tricks that our eyes play on us. And again, if you move into color, if you graduate into color, you have to remember how to create these effects as well in your work. Another effect that happens, not so much a trick of the eye, but when you have paler skin, and we have areas of translucency around the face, so the tip of the nose or the forehead skin stretched against the bone. There's not much muscle under the forehead compared to the rest of the face. Or the under eyelids, those puffy eyes. We tend to see a little bit more of the blue of the blood. So the blood isn't blue under the skin, it's bluish. It's very red and very cool toned until it oxidizes and becomes a little bit more brown when it reaches the air. So under the skin, if the skin tone is a white, yellow, or very pale value, which is what she is, I decided for her to be very pale. We will also have some of that purple come through, and there's a lot of yellow and a lot of green in our skin tone that comes through and cancels out the red and the blue of the blood. So what's left behind is just the blue. So the blue ends up being left behind, canceled a little bit out by the yellow in the skin, but it's so translucent that we just end up with this purple. And this purple just sits underneath the eyes, especially on pale skin. There's also numerous veins hanging around under the eyes, in the eyeball, everywhere, that adds to that purple effect or that greenish effect. It really just depends how exactly pale we're talking, and if it's a cool pale or a warm pale. There are warm pales. But here, just around here, I'm adding just the final touches of the black, bringing in the darkest darks. And remember that in order to graduate into color, you do have to decide on your blackest black. So you may not have to go all fully white. In certain areas they need it. So around the nose, I didn't go full white. Around the cheeks, I didn't go full white yet. Full white meaning bringing the whitest areas. So it's not using white everywhere. It's just wherever we need whitest white. I'm not doing that just yet. I can do that with a yellow-white universal light source color on the final stages after I move into color. But in the grayscale areas, you do have to bring in the blackest black. A black is black. It's colorless, so you can bring it in without value. Even white is. But I like to bring in white with a yellow, with a universal yellow. So after you make sure that all your dark spots are intact, you have all the design features, all the design necessities, even lipstick pigmentation, even makeup pigmentation, detail in the eyebrows, all of that is done with before you move into bringing in color. And the way I bring in color is by using a color mode. So make a new layer on Photoshop and use color mode. And you start with the most basic underlying value that gets the ball rolling. It could be any color, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be some sort of super accurate skin tone color that takes care of all the things you could ever possibly need. It doesn't have to be an all-in-one color. It doesn't have to be the best beige. It doesn't have to be the best skin tone. You don't have to sit there for hours deciding on what it is. As long as you get some kind of fleshy depiction of that pale skin tone you're going for, and the rule is basically what complexion is it, what race is it from, what race are you mimicking, is the only question you need to answer, because you already have all your values in place. So the color mode layer only brings in the color. It does not affect values, which is good, which is what we want. We only use color mode to transfer. I only recommend color mode. I don't recommend you mess with the values at all in any way with a darken or a screen or a multiply layer to bring in skin tones. Don't touch the values. You've been working on them this entire time. Color mode does not touch the values at all. Color mode just brings in the skin tone. So what I brought in is a very basic, universal, light beige, something to get the ball rolling. Then I look at how that beige is behaving in the midtones, in the shadows, and the highlights. In the highlights, it needs to be dimmer. And then in the shadows, it needs to be dimmer, meaning less saturated. And in the midtones, it needs to be saturated. And by dimmer, I just mean less saturated in the highlights and shadows. A midtone beige does not exist in shadows. It exists as a cooler version in shadows and a paler, desaturated version in highlights. And highlight is affected by the universal light source color. So light source doesn't just give off its magnitude and reveal an object, it gives off its color as well. So that gives me a chance to bring in yellow later. Photoshop forces saturation in darker values or midtones that are very different from each other, like a darker midtone versus a lighter midtone. So typically we have to manually go in there and desaturate per midtone drop. A midtone is saturated, but lighter ends of the midtone are most saturated, as you can see by the color picker on Photoshop. The most saturated values, the prettiest values basically, the values that are easiest to use, are always at the upper half of the grayscale slider. So that's what we're trying to do, is that we're trying to limit how much saturation is brought in by that first layer of beige when we're moving into color. So layer mode, color, bring in your beige value and desaturate as you climb up too high or climb down into the blacks too low. That means that I desaturated around eyebrows, I desaturated all and any black spots, pigmentation, lash lines, lipstick, and I brought in my separate color for lipstick later. I desaturated around cheekbones or the shadows of the cheekbones, I desaturated hair. Mostly because I wanted her to have like a gray tone as well. This is inspired by the Munsters, by the way. And then I brought in her specific after that beige layer and I adjusted it. I brought in the eye color and let that seep into the eyelids, as I told you. I brought in a purple for the lower parts of the eyes. I brought in a green for the areas directly under that. So the eyelids get purple along with the waterline, which is very forgotten all the time. Please bring in as much blush as you can for the waterline. And I brought in a green under that purple layer, so green on the upper cheekbones. And again, that's just the desaturated paleness of the skin as it slowly recedes into less fat towards the eyeballs. The eyeballs don't really pack fat. The nose doesn't pack fat. The forehead doesn't pack fat. So it gets to be very, very translucent. There's not much muscle and fat in between us and the bone. So again, I'm just bringing in a new blush tone, a blush tone that I am using now for the eyelid space, the eye socket space as an eyeshadow. A blush color that I'm using in all the mid-tones beneath the highlights of the cheekbones. It's a very kind of, I call it an acidic pink that I bring in around the cheekbones, and I bring that around the lipstick as well. The lipstick, I wanted to have a little bit more of like a holographic kind of coolness to it. So I brought in a blue surrounding the highlight of the lipstick, and then the purple, and then saturated excessively on the outline of the highlight, and just kept the highlight white because the lipstick is a sheen. It has a sheen to it. So it shines a little bit. The hair, as you can tell, all the magic of the hair, it exists as the grayscales. I didn't really do much with the hair. I just brought in some accent reds and some spike saturations here and there. But the lesson why I spent so long talking about the importance of grayscale, because that's what it is. It's all the grayscale that's doing this work. Your work will not look good if your grayscales are dark per object, per local value. If you're using like unusually bright whites and blacks and a relatively supposed to be mid-tone tan skin, it's not going to look good. It's going to look muddy. And a lot of people complain, hey, I know I delayed my grayscales and I transferred into color, but all my values are muddy. You know what? I hate this method. Well, you're hating on this method because you didn't think about the first half of this entire stuff. I waited probably till the last. The first stream was 4 hours, almost 3.5 hours. Almost 4 hours, 3.5 hours. Was just on the painting. And then the second stream took me probably an hour and a half to an hour to actually just add in all the color. And I was streaming and talking to my viewers. So it probably took me like 30 minutes to really just finish the painting and actually add the color. A lot of you graduate yourselves and take the liberty of moving into color way too early. You should be lasting a while on your values, flipping your canvas, taking a break away from your painting, coming back, making sure you don't have unusual spikes in contrast or contrast where you don't need it, making sure you're not using contrast to blanket or patch up bad form work that you know you need to work on. Maybe you're not ready for color yet. Maybe you have more mileage ahead of you, that you are trying color right now and are failing because you are not at that level mentally yet. Skill-wise, application-wise, theory-wise, you're just not ready for it. But it's worth it to wait. It's worth it to work hard on your color, because it will pay off. You will have this wonderful payoff where you get this beautiful, beautiful shine in all the colors. They behave so well together. You don't have to do much work afterwards, much maintenance afterwards to your values, because, oh, well, you graduated too early into the color and you missed out on some areas here and there. I made sure that all my values were intact. I didn't have to do too much editing around nose shadows or socket shadows or radial drops. I made sure all the blacks were black where they needed to be, and that's why my colors worked right away. This is the ideal, typically, what you're supposed to be following. Perfect values, and then move into color very carefully. Think about skin layers, think about color effects and color tricks of the eye, and see how you can blend all the colors together seamlessly, not having unusual awkward patches of color sitting around. Everything blends in. The skin is very spongy. In this case, it was skin. It's very spongy. And remember that every color has a value underneath it. Red is relatively dark, so if you want to use some sort of dark red, you're going to darken the painting, or it's going to look too unusually saturated for such a bright value, considering you wanted to use a dark red. And these are just very, very abstract terms that I'm describing, and they only make sense once you actually try it yourself. So stick to your grayscales for a while. I promise you it pays off. Thank you, everyone, for your patronage. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, guys. Bye.